There is something scary about making space and allowing there to be space that you don't inherently feel like you have to fill super, super quickly. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. I started meditating about 1.5 years ago. And by that I mean, yeah, I can see you smiling. So no, that doesn't mean
you've been meditating for a solid 1.5 years.
Right, it doesn't mean I've been meditating for 18 months.
I wasn't listening to you yesterday. I was meditating.
But I downloaded an app. I was thinking about
you mentioned this. Isn't it like 10% better or something?
10% happier.
10% happier. We talked about this one time because it's like such a, not snarky, but it's such a non-aspirational kind of, it's like your life will be amazing. It's just like, a little better than it is.
Right, a little better, just measurably better, but we're not going to promise you the moon, which I respect.
Exactly. It's so you. I
had looked at reviews and all this stuff, and I didn't know much about meditation, to be honest with you, but I'd heard that it was really beneficial. So about 1.5 years ago, I downloaded this app, and I'd been kind of sticking with it. I can't say every day, but I've been getting better at it, more accustomed to the practice. I'm more appreciative of the practice. And so I'm maybe 15 to 20 minutes a day. Anyway, 10% Happier just recently came out with what they called their Summer Sanity Challenge. And what they said is, meditate 15 out of these 21 days. And they put together a course, like a 21-day course. They're saying you don't have to be perfect, just 15 out of these 21 days and for X number of minutes. And it's a video and all that.
I love that they're turning meditation into like a competitive smackdown sort of environment. Because I'm like, I'm in.
You can share your minutes.
I can meditate better than everyone.
Better than I am more humble than anyone. So anyway, as I was going through this and I was listening to the video and going through the meditation, I was thinking about the applicability to business, and not in terms of how meditation might help you individually in running a business or in participating in your daily life. But much of meditation, at least that I've seen, has to do with being fully engaged in the present, meaning for that brief period of time, hopefully it goes throughout your day, but in that brief period of time when you're actually meditating, you're thinking about what you're feeling now, the sensations in your body now, coolness or warmth or pressure or whatever it happens to be. And the point is not to clear your mind, meaning you're not thinking about anything at all, but the point is to recognize the fact that concerns about the future or daydreams or thinking about that thing that happened 2 days ago that you're still perseverating on, those are all like passing thoughts, like clouds. And just for this time to make you better at concentrating now on exactly what's going on now. And I started thinking about that in the context of my clients and running my own firm, because so many of the conversations that I have are fixated, deservedly so, on, well, what are they going to do then? What's going to happen in the future? And what do you think is going to happen? But I've had a series of conversations with people saying, okay, since we don't know, we're in a time of such great and unprecedented uncertainty, then maybe we should stop focusing on the frustration inherent in not being able to predict the future with any kind of reliability, and just talk more about what are the sensations right now? What are the pain points right now? What are you seeing? And
like, what problem are you currently needing to solve, rather than like generating lists of future problems and trying to also solve those?
Right. So a lot of people, when I talk to them about the pain points now, they're really talking about anticipated pain points.
Yeah. So I will preach on that soapbox so much, because I'm actually really not a big fan of planning. Like when someone has wanted to hire me to facilitate like a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, even before COVID, yeah, I don't say no necessarily. Now I am actually, but I just think that there's nothing. Well, let me back up for 1 second. There's nothing wrong with looking out into the future. I mean, it's absolutely important. You can't be an entrepreneur or a leader of anything and exclusively just look at the step right in front of your foot in the moment. You have to look up and orient and, climb a tree, make sure you're headed in the vague right direction kind of thing. But I've often thought that you have to like glance up, check the horizon, look down at your feet, up, down. And that's one of the things that's hard about leading is that you do have to look at multiple sight lines to gauge where you are. So in that way, I'm not suggesting you never try to predict the future, but that is so distinct from like imagining what obstacles there are and then also trying to work in solving all those obstacles where you are right now. And I was laughing a minute ago because I instantly remembered a thing that I may have even told this story before long ago, but long before I was even married, a couple years before I was married, I was visiting an aunt of mine in Seattle who homeschooled her kids. And I was kind of fascinated by that concept. I kind of liked the idea. And I was asking her about how it worked. And she did it because they were a military family. And as they moved around, her kids were getting not only inconsistent, but like, they moved 1 year and at that school, they were doing all the things her son had done the last year, like learning the states. And she was like, and who knows what I missed because if they flip-flopped it or whatever. So that's why they did it. And I was fascinated. And then at some point, I'm looking through all of her materials. Frankly, one of my biggest reasons I liked it was you get to buy all the office supplies, but whatever. But I'm looking through all this stuff. I know. And then I started talking about how, but, I'm not qualified to teach like, high school chemistry. There's going to be absolutely this like top level of what I could really be the teacher for. And she's this very like droll, sarcastic kind of like, her face is always doing this kind of person. And she's like, so, let me get this straight. You are worried about the high school chemistry level classes of children that you don't have yet from a marriage that you aren't in yet. And I was like, oh, yes. And her whole point was, you could do it for, if you like it, you could do it for, kindergarten and the first few grades. And then she said, and when those problems start to come up, you will either solve them or make other choices. And I was like, oh, yeah. So all of us do that all the time, like that reminder to not look too far out and try and solve problems number 7, 8, 9, and 10, instead of just looking out for guidance, but then putting your only planning effort into a much closer time frame. I don't know, is that what you were saying, or is it different than that?
No, that is. And I also take it one step farther where I will understand and focus on the problems than the challenges that I know I'll face, but completely discount the opportunities that are going to arise in the future. And the easy way to say that is, let's say that I lost a big client or a big account, or maybe even a large part of my income the previous quarter was based on this huge litigation, and we went to verdict and we're done. And I'll sit there and I still try and breathe my way out of this, but I'll sit there and go, well, but I still have payroll. I still have rent. That's going to come in as regularly as the tides.
Right.
But this money is gone. So I'll be focusing on, I'll allow myself to contemplate future problems, only offset it against present solutions.
Yes. That's a really insightful insight. So keep rolling with that example for a second. So if you didn't do that, or I guess the future opportunities, you just don't know what they are.
I don't know. So I don't know.
Maybe that's part of why it's hard to do that.
Well, it's very hard. You don't know when the phone's going to ring and who's going to be on the other end of that phone call, et cetera. Now, you may know, like I can look back and say, okay, I've been a lawyer for 30 plus years and I've been running this firm for 18. And, we've had cycles, but the phone has never absolutely stopped ringing.
Right. And what it may mean is that you might say yes to something that you would have passed off if you need the revenue. So, I mean, you might make different choices, but that's part of why the catastrophizing of the longer term problems, I think, is is not just problematic, but I'm always conscious of where you're spending the energy and the neurons that you have to better your business. And if you're spending them on things that may never happen, then like what is losing out on having that time and energy and focus from you that could have benefited from having that time and energy and focus?
Right. No, it's exactly right. So I guess I'd kind of move off of the story a little bit, because the story that I began this episode with is on mindfulness and just concentrating on the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
And just through this conversation, what I think is the important thing is, to your point, you don't have to just, a leader can't afford just to look down at his or her feet, for the here and now. You've got to look ahead. But it's that misalignment that causes so many people stress, meaning I'm going to look ahead and factor in all of the problems or challenges that I know will arise, but I'm not going to allow for the presence of those opportunities or advantages or benefits or income, in my example, that's going to arise in the future. And it's that misalignment that causes, frankly, me, and I know from conversations, a lot of clients, the most stress.
Yeah.
And so they start trying to solve in the present problems which do not, by definition, arise until the future.
Yeah. And I think part of that is because loss of any kind comes with a weight, and you can feel the risk of loss, and you can't make up what might take its place because it hasn't gotten there yet. I had a friend who lost a job that she loved, and I'm never the person who then says, I'm sure something else will come along, because just feel what you're feeling right now. But interestingly, the thing that did come along, not only could she not have imagined, but the reason she couldn't imagine about it was the offer that she got from another friend of hers for an even more amazing thing. That guy actually said, I've been wanting to pitch you for years to come work for me, but I knew you were really happy, and I didn't want to put any pressure on you. So the minute you were free, like that, minute I heard that, I wanted to gobble you up and bring you in to like lead this thing. And it was a huge opportunity for her. So there is something scary about making space and allowing there to be space that you don't inherently feel like you have to fill super, super quickly. But I don't want to skip over where you started the story, because I don't even know what the answer to this is, but I think it's important to just explore it for a second, is because even we're talking about this stay in the present, and then we've spent the entire conversation talking about the future. So what does, if we take that metaphor of mindfulness or meditation or staying in the present and noticing what's here now, like what does that look like in business? What's important about that?
I think that from the conversations that I've had even this morning, part of what that looks like is just actively talking about what do we need to solve now, as opposed to what do we have to put in place because of where we might be in the future. So
like the first next problem.
Yeah, the first next problem. I was on the phone with my firm, the morning phone call, and we realized that we had an administrative problem that we were scrambling to solve. And rather than saying, the first impulse was saying, yeah, but that's only going to last until we have even semi-regular office hours and all that stuff, so we can just continue to scramble. But in thinking about it, I said, well, no, why don't we just create a mechanism that actually solves this problem, because this is where we are. And if that mechanism falls by the wayside because on September 1st, we don't need it anymore because we're going in the office 10 hours a week or whatever it is, then that's fine. And so we had conversations, not just this morning, but all of last week, on solving certain problems that we have now to make this better now.
Oh, so I'm so glad I asked the question, because you just opened the door to almost the alternate universe of where we first took this, which is, we were talking about it, things of where like something bad happens, and so you're afraid of what that looks like. But zooming into the future also really enables a lot of toleration. Like, well, we're only going to have, and I've seen this a ton with people working from home. There are some people who made their space work for them. And then, those people who are 6 months in still teetering on a lounge chair with their computer on a card table.
Yeah.
Not because, and that is obviously not, outside of like people who don't have other options for that. But, if you didn't bring your monitor home from work, if that was allowed, and like you just make it work for you while you're here. And I do understand, I mean, if it really was like, we're going to be home for 4 days, then of course you don't do that.
Yeah.
But
if it's just a blizzard.
yeah, exactly. For a snow day, you don't bring your entire office home, or go buy a chair or get a better table or whatever, renovate a room. But I was actually talking to a client a couple of weeks ago who's just, and it's funny because it was such like a under the current kind of issue, but like they have one office in the house, and there's actually set up for both she and her husband to work from that office. Normally, like they both have a desk in the office, but they can't both work in there all day long because they're both on phone calls all day long. So that just doesn't work. So she has been sitting at this like vanity in their bedroom, doing her work. And it's for reasons because he needs all the like the screens and stuff for the business that he does. Like he really needs his full setup, and it's a legitimate balance there. But she was just miserable and it's like an uncomfortable chair, an uncomfortable desk. She doesn't have it. She doesn't like the way the space feels. And, they don't have another room.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
Exactly. And so it was interesting that, she's like, yeah, but I don't know how long this is going to last. I'm like, well, it's lasted this long. It's not going away in the next 3 days. And what's, obviously don't spend 10 grand or even, maybe much of anything, but could you rearrange the room so it's just a little more comfortable? Could you get a better chair, or like, what is the thing that would make it better? And how big of a leap is that to make your now better instead of tolerating it for what may actually be months? Like at what point do you settle in and get comfortable and not tolerate things?
It's not just physical comfort. And I was joking around about the nobody puts baby in the corner, but I do believe, this is just my guess, that even though her husband needed, like I have, because I do so many contracts, I've got this 3 monitor setup and I need a lot of space. And there are some businesses that don't require that. They're not less important. They just don't require that kind of setup.
Exactly.
And so, but at the same time, I have to believe there's probably a psychological component, even if she doesn't resent her husband because he needs that setup, et cetera, that she's been relegated to a corner. She's at this vanity. And I think that there is a more than legitimate reason to say, okay, let's pull out. This is the mental space I am right now, is feeling like I'm in a corner or less than, not his fault, but just feeling like I'm compressed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that is something that you have to be aware of, how you're feeling now and how to resolve that now. And maybe to your point, the answer isn't let's build an addition to the house, but it can mean, how do I understand that I am feeling this way right now. How can I stop that? Because that spills over.
Yeah. That's the, I think I really love this conversation of like tapping into how you feel right now. Is there something, I can see this sort of little flow chart mapped out, like, is there something you can do about it? No. Like, okay, well then, that kind of goes in this bucket. Like then maybe some deep breathing and more meditating. Is there something you can do about it? Yes. Then some curiosity around like, well, why am I not? Because we're talking about things like spending money on furniture, but most of the times that I have had these conversations about things people are tolerating, it's more like a conversation they're not having, or or just a decision they're not making, or just even something like going outside to walk. Like I actually have really been needing to reset myself on not booking appointments back to back to back to back, which I've never in my life done. And I think we've even talked about this before, where I've said I really have to stop doing that. And I do for a few days, and then I'm doing it again. And it's not good for me in any way, shape, or form. I mean, you saw it yesterday. We little back scenes information. We tried to record yesterday afternoon. Like, I couldn't stop yawning. My thoughts just weren't together. I was obliterated because it was like my 8th hour sitting here not moving. And So those kinds of like, if I check in the day, how am I feeling right now? I'm going to, go to this meeting that doesn't really need me 10 minutes late so I can go sit outside for a couple of minutes, and just
Right.
making that choice instead of just tolerating it like, well, I'll just get through to the end of the day. But
Well, I think that part of that goes back to a conversation that we had, I think, for last episode, which is reframing the question from, can I do anything about this? Can I change this? To how can I change this?
yeah, how can I change this?
So you start talking about your.
That sounds good. I should listen to that podcast you have.
You should. It was actually pretty good. But the other thing that it just reminded me of, which is probably a whole different conversation, but it ties in with one of the ways that one of my biggest financial difficulties that I had, now it's around the 2007-2008 recession, so it's quite some time ago, was I kept on staff and people so that I was equipped to address, basically to fight 2.5
clients who might come.
Clients who might come, the kind of volume that I knew I wasn't going to have now, and I might have way in the future. And I didn't recognize what was happening now. I have another thing on a much smaller scale. I have a gym membership in Padonia. The reason that I have a gym membership in Padonia, I live in South Central Pennsylvania, as you know, is because
and Padonia is down here in Baltimore.
Yeah, every morning, what I would do is I'd go to the gym, I'd swim, I'd work out. I'd get to the gym somewhere around 6 or 6:30, swim, work out, and then I'd go to the office. Well, I'm not going to the office. I haven't gone to the office since March.
Right.
Except for, just occasionally. I haven't used that gym. It's been closed most of the time. I don't have that routine anymore. Now, initially, I kept paying them because I had spoken to them, as you know, and I didn't want them to just stop paying their hourly workers. And so
Sure.
I wanted to make sure they had some income, and they said they would keep paying hourly workers from the members who kept paying dues. But now they're kind of open, and they do classes, and they've started charging everybody, not just making it voluntary. And I'm still paying it, but I'm thinking, but I'm not going to go down there and do that now.
You can't swim virtually.
You can't swim virtually, and it's going to be.
If you want to take up Zumba, that might work. But
it's going to take 2.5 hours out of my day. I'm not going to do that, but I'm still thinking, oh, but I need it for
when I go back to work.
Whenever everything gets back to normal.
That's the thing. I think so it's so interesting. I just, by the way, got off right before this call. I was on a call with somebody going through the do I do layoffs concept, mindset, like the consideration, decision point, or whatever. And I was thinking of your story. I actually used it. I said, I have a friend who, when we talk about regrets, like one of the few regrets is waiting as long as you did. And it's balanced out with such a loveliness of wanting to do good by people. And like, there's a lot of good in there. And, but he's already been having them work on like internal projects for like 4 or 5 weeks now. And so you're past that point where you're jumping the gun or like panic reacting. And that sort of willingness to pause and say, like, what is here right now? And what choices do I have right now? And what do I know? You absolutely have to sort of wing out and say, like, how likely is it that I'm going to have a full tilt boogie project list in 2 weeks? You don't want to have lost staff, but so it was a good conversation about looking at, but what was interesting is once we paused and once we like slowed down the conversation to look at the now and really, really look at the now and not just let it blow by and I don't want to talk about that. He got more creative. Like there were other options that came up. Like I said, well, have you thought about just, I guess I added this idea, but that's not the point. 20%, furloughing people like a partial part of the week. And he's like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Makes so much sense. And he couldn't think that way because he didn't want to just focus on how it was feeling now. He was keeping his focus out in the like, well, but when projects come back. And that's the other risk of not spending enough time in the now. So maybe that gets back to that original point that I felt like I had to caveat earlier. This conversation is not about not planning, because you joked about it, but the point of meditation is not to meditate all the time. So we're not saying in business, always look right at your feet, but not enough people spend time meditating and feeling what's in their now. And I don't think enough businesses pause and really think about the now, because there's some weird story that like planning is where it's at. And it's and looking to the future is where it's at. It's definitely partly out there, but it's also right here.
Yeah, I think it's all about building mindfulness into your business practice, which means that allowing time for what's going on right now.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.